Hi, I'm Keith Ferrazzi. Stay tuned because what we're going to be talking about today is how you are failing yourself as a leader. Stop leading in the way you're leading, and I want you to reach down and make your team extraordinary. Stop leading in a way that makes you feel overloaded, and I want you to share that load with your extraordinary team. They will step up, but you have to step up. I'll see you there.
Congratulations! You are tuned into Dov Baron's Leadership and Loyalty Show, the #1 podcast for Fortune 500 executives and those who are dedicated to creating a quantum leap in leadership. Your host, Dov Baron. He's an executive mentor to leaders like you, a contributing writer for Entrepreneur Magazine, CEO World, and he's been featured on CNN, Fox, CBS, and many other notable sites. Dov Baron is an international business speaker who was named by Inc. magazine as one of the top 100 leadership speakers to hire. Now, over to Dov Baron.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of Leadership and Loyalty Tips for Executives, part of the Full Monty interview series. Hey, listen, I am here for part 2 of my interview with Keith Ferrazzi. And if you don't know who he is, well, he is a New York Times best-selling author, #1 best-selling author. He wrote books like Never Eat Alone, Who's Got Your Back. He's an entrepreneur, founder, and chairman of Ferrazzi Greenlight, which is an executive coaching, team coaching. He's worked with organizations like the World Bank, Delta Airlines, General Motors. He's a thought leader. He's a frequent contributor for Forbes, Entrepreneur, Wall Street Journal, Fast Company, a whole bunch of others. His newest book is a fantastic book, which is called, are you ready? It's called Leading Without Authority. We've been talking about that in past episode, and now we're back for part 2 of this because this is a phenomenal process that he's put together, because it really is so desperately needed for our times in remote, as we've all gone remote, as things have changed enormously. So, ladies and gentlemen, once again, please welcome back Keith Ferrazzi!
Yes. I hear the crowd. Thank you so much. Fantastic. Thank you. And the last conversation, it was passionate and intense, and I'm excited about continuing that between us today. So thank you.
Thank you. So we were talking about the research that you did, couple of $1 million into remote work way before it was popular, and now everybody's kind of thrown into this situation where the old saying was you can't turn an ocean liner on a dime, and ocean liners had 2 weeks to change or go out of business. Very simple.
And they did it.
And they did it. They did it and did it amazingly. And a lot of those did it with the help of you and what it is, your company. So as I said, you and your organization spent $2 million on and published all this research study, fascinating research, particularly in the time of remote. So talk to us about what came out and what is so important for us to know now, because we had to pivot and we've done it, but I think there's a lot of people still waiting to go back to normal. And I keep screaming, normal is over. Forget normal. Normal was unhealthy and dysfunctional anyway.
It was.
Let's find something better. So what have you
just teed up 6 questions I have in my head that I like to answer. So hopefully I can do this in an expeditious way. Yes, we did research way before anybody suggested. And I'll tell you, the little trick was not the fact that I had some crystal ball that knew any of this was coming. I was coaching John Chambers and his executive team at Cisco that had created WebEx and had created telepresence. And I had started to smell and see this technology, and I started to understand the value of it. And I said to John, John, it's one thing to put technology out there, but if you don't follow the technology with new people rules that meet the new work world we're living in, right? So how do people use this thing? And so that's the research that I got funded along with a few other companies, Accenture, Siemens Communications. So what I have to say that I want all of you to think about is this. Don't look at remote and the remote distance as being a problem. Okay. The distance that matters is not the physical distance. The distance that gets created that matters is the strategic distance. It's the lack of alignment, because you used to get strategic clarity, not just in the meetings you had. You got strategic clarity in the meeting, after the meeting, in the walk down the hallway, in the conversation as you're walking past someone's office and you stop in and you're like, I've been struggling with something. So those little serendipitous face-to-face interactions helped build alignment. They also were a part of the operational cadence of how you worked. You didn't know it, but the informal ways you interacted with each other were actually a critical component of the work.
Yes.
But the problem then is when you move to a remote basis, everything that was informal needs to become formal.
Yes.
And the problem is if you're not meticulous about building remote formal solutions to replace informal activities, then as a leader, you will fail. So one leadership team I was coaching, I just asked them, and this is something I ask you to ask all of your teams, ask your teams, what are we missing the most in a remote world from our previously co-located world? You'll hear a lot of different things, but one of the things you might hear is those serendipitous moments where we're walking down the hall and we bump into somebody and we get an idea or a point of view because that we would have never gotten otherwise. Because everything now is so structured and formal in our interactions. It's a meeting after meeting after meeting. And I said, great. So instead of stopping there and bemoaning the fact that that doesn't exist, now I want you to stay and answer the question, how can we make these serendipitous moments happen again in a remote world, but better? And they scratched their head and they got to work. And what they designed was something very interesting. This executive team decided to allocate an hour a week per person of the executive team, break that hour a week down into 4 15-minute calls per executive team member. And they basically identified people all over the world who are high potentials. And every executive team got 15 minutes with a drop-in with a high potential. And in that high potential, that person came prepared with the following conversation. 5 minutes of personally understanding who that person was. By that person was answering a question, what's going on in their life right now, sweet, and what's going on in that person's life that's sour. Second thing that person came prepared to do was to give a piece of advice to the executive team that they felt the executive team should hear that was either an area for growth or an area for opportunity of improvement or a risk that this person thought that they had. So the person had thought really hard. They're ready to be open and vulnerable, and they're ready to offer a piece of advice to the executive team. Every executive team member got 4 of those. Here's what happened. They were blown away by the insights of these individuals, so much more than what would have happened in the serendipitous passing in the hallway. And they no longer had what I call the headquarters overweight, which is when you're in headquarters bumping around with people, you hear only headquarters points of view. You don't hear what's going on in Kuala Lumpur. You don't hear what's going on in Chicago. You don't hear what's going on in your field sales organization. So now the equilibrium rises and everybody has a chance to get their point of view heard. And then finally, little things like in the sweet and sour, you started gaining empathy for what it was like for your employees today in this environment. And you started to have an understanding of how fractured or how frustrated or how fatigued your people were. So my point then is, if we get purposeful about being in a remote environment, the real problem is the strategic distance, not the physical distance. The real problem is the operational distance, not the physical distance. And the real problem is the affinity distance, which is the intimacy and the connectedness of the team, all of which we can engineer and close. So, this is just one little example of, and by the way, we have documented all of this stuff, and I will make, because you've asked it, I'll make sure that your team gets access to these studies, and we'll do it at the same place we did on the last call. We'll put these studies and publish them at keithferrazzi.com/loyalty just for your team.
That's amazing. Thank you. Again, thank you for your generosity. And what you've brought up there is something I've been addressing with the people that I've been working with, and what I've been guiding them is said, if you ask around what people miss, so you and I both know that more than 30% of the workforce will never return to the office. They're just never going back.
Yeah.
There's another portion who are going to go back part-time, and a small portion will go back full-time. And the small portion of going back full-time, the research has shown that they're going to go back for one of two reasons. They miss people and that physical interaction with people desperately, because they probably don't have a lot of other of that in their life. And as I wrote about in Fiercely Loyal, millennials understand that work-life blend is not work-life balance, is blend. Their friends are at work, they want to see them. That's number one. And the other one is, damn, I just can't get anything done because the kids are always screaming and I want to go back to work just so I can do that. But that's a much smaller portion. And what I've said to the teams I've been working with is you have got to find a way to create a community while you're online. So how do you bring your people together? And here, I'll give you one of the things that we've had leaders doing with their teams. And I say, it's very important that you go in and you lead. And they go, what do you mean? Go first. Okay, what is it? You're going to play a game, and there's only 4 people in the room at a time, or maximum 6, but ideally 4, and it's 2 truths and a lie. And you play 2 truths and a lie because it creates play, fun, and people will laugh, which is a bonding process. It allows the oxytocin in the brain to connect. And 2 truths and a lie. The truths, wanting a truth, is likely to have some sadness to it, which is going to generate empathy. So you're going to get dopamine. You're going to get all those great endorphins that are going to go off, and you're going to get that the mirror neurons working. You're going to get all the great stuff that's going to bring people together so that we can get to know each other, because it's going to be very easy to not get to know each other in a remote world. And it's a shitty excuse that we now are on Zoom, because I've been doing these remote things for years. I love them. And if somebody had said to me 10 years ago, some of your closest friends are people you've never met, never been in the same room with, never hugged, I just said, you're on crack. Now, my brothers and sisters, many of them, are people I've never met. They're people I love dearly, and I would, in normal circumstances, jump on a plane for them, and they would do the same for me. But some of them I've never physically been in the same room. And that's because there is that level of reciprocity, of vulnerability. And I love that you're finding ways to do that.
Yeah, you've scratched the surface of something we talked a little bit on the last episode, and I want to bring it back up again.
Yeah.
There are 8 attributes of high-performing teams. And the 8 attributes of high-performing teams need to be negotiated and discussed among the team. And right now, you have norms. You have social norms on your teams. You've just recommended a social norm of play and vulnerability. I don't know if every team out there has a social norm of play or vulnerability.
No.
I would just suggest that you have given a practice of play or vulnerability, but we should precede that with the discussion on whether or not this is what the role of a team is, right? So what we have found, there are 8 attributes of high-performing teams. 2 of them are exactly what you're talking about: energy and relationship.
Yes.
So we have a diagnostic tool that people are now available to you and your community, which we're giving to everybody. There are 8 attributes, and I'm going to look here. On the energy and relationship, I'll go to the energy one for a second. And this is really important, actually. All team members celebrate one another's success. It's a very important question. We find that celebration is a really critical element of lifting each other's energy. But where do people get their celebration from? Are they waiting for it from you, or are they able to give it to each other as well? And the shift of accountability for lifting each other up, celebrating each other, applauding each other, right? That doesn't always have to come from the leader.
No, absolutely.
Right? And you can have a social contract that says this team will do that for each other. Relationship is the same thing, which is whose responsibility is it to build the kind of relational strength among the team, that care among the team. It's not just the leaders. Now, your job, if what I'm going to give you as a tool, which is this diagnostic tool, which your leaders can go into their teams, go through this diagnostic tool, rate how the team is from 1 to 5. But then the kind of practices like you just gave, which is a relationship forward practice. I'll give you a couple of others. I use something called personal professional check-in. It can be a standalone meeting where the whole meeting is intended for letting people really spend 5 minutes at a time just talking about where they are right now, personally and professionally. Where are they struggling personally and professionally? It is an empathy builder. Now, the thing about empathy is the bridge to a productive relationship. If you have empathy, you have forgiveness. If you have empathy, right, you have the willingness to care so much that I'll tell you the truth. You have candor.
Yes.
And what's the key that opens empathy is vulnerability. And that's what you said, 2 truths and a lie. One of them is likely to be a sadness or a struggle. That's vulnerability. So as a leader, you need to open up this dialogue among your team saying, we own each other's energy. We own the relationships among us. And while your practice is 100% on target, I want your team to step up and take responsibility, not just you.
Yes, I agree.
So the whole idea of leading without authority, which is the new book that I've written, which is, you nicely plugged. Here it is.
There it is.
Leading without authority teaches you as a leader to move that responsibility for leadership off of your shoulders alone and into the team. And that is such a powerful principle.
Yeah, I fully agree. I think that I do believe that leaders have to lead the way. That's why we're called leaders. We have to go first. But going first does not mean staying up front. It means you go first and then back off and let everybody run with the ball. It's fine. So I'm going to, because I often say to people, to the leaders I'm working with, people need to know it's safe. So there's this old adage you and I'm very familiar with, which was called open door policy. And I said, listen, dude, you can take the door off the hinges. It doesn't mean anybody's walking in. There's a force field there called hierarchy, and nobody's walking in the door. You have to walk out in order for them to come in. You have to lead. You have to go first, and then you have to back off and let people come to you. We worked with a company years ago, and they were talking about they couldn't keep millennials loyal. And I said, okay, well, what have you done? They went through all these things. We pay better than everybody else. We've put these bean bags in. We've built coffee machines. We even have a foosball machine. And I said, yeah, does anybody use them? And they go, no, we don't understand. And I said, do you use them? And they go, no, we put them in for the staff. There's your problem. You were actually saying it's not there for use. It's not safe for anybody to use it because they see you in the office and they think you're going to judge them for being out there.
Right.
Oh,
and by the way, some leaders probably would.
Of course, but in a company they wouldn't, right? And they would. This is the thing that we don't understand is it's collaborative. It as you were saying before, it's synergistic. It's lifting each other up, but we got to be one to step into that. And I think it's a lot of it is to do with 2 of my central pieces in the work that we do, which is curiosity and courage. You got to be willing to be curious, and you got to be willing to be courageous. And that means, you're going to put your foot in your mouth sometimes and be willing to be courageous enough to do that and be curious enough to know the impact of it.
So
with candor, which is what you're saying, which is great.
Let's take these and let's design them into the meeting. So one of the things, Dove, that I've done, it's a little trick, but it's been incredibly successful and lucrative for many organizations, is instead of talking about leaders in the abstract, I talk about teams in meetings. And the reason I do that is because when you talk to a leader and say, I want you to lead this different way, it's a very abstract concept. Yes. But if I say to a leader, I want your meetings to function differently, here's how I want them to function. It's a box that they can look at and understand easier. And if I say I want candor in the box called a meeting, I gave you in our last discussion a bunch of practices for that, right? Yes. We're now talking about how do you build intimacy and relationship. Well, at the beginning of a meeting, you do a quick personal professional check-in, or you do this play exercise of 2 truths and a lie. Now you've taken a box called a meeting, engineered it for a new set of behaviors. I want to add up probably one of the most powerful things you could re-engineer your meetings for, which is for collaboration and innovation.
Yes.
Most of us today engineer our meetings for siloed report outs. Really think about that. We're saying we want our teams to collaborate. We're saying we want innovation. But the way we curate our meeting is we sit there and we say, okay, Dove, you first, Jane, you second, Jimmy, you third. And we just go around and do report outs, which only reinforces this idea that Dove's speaking and then Keith's responding, Jane's speaking and then Keith's responding, right? This is the hub and spoke.
Yep.
What if you said to Jane, Jane, in the next meeting, I want you to come with the most interesting problem you're struggling with in marketing. Jimmy, I want you to come with the most interesting problem you're struggling with in product development. And we're going to put that problem on the table.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to spend some time talking about that problem so everybody understands it. Then we're going to push a button and everyone's going to go into breakout group and they're going to spend 10 minutes coming up with their feedback to you on how you could innovate around that question. And then they do, and then they come back. You've taken just 20 minutes and now you've squeezed all of the insight from your whole darn team into the room. What would you have done in the 20 minutes otherwise? The person would have done a 20-minute report out.
Yep.
Some people would have been doing emails. Other people would have been half-heartedly listening and waiting for it was their turn. And then you go on to the next person. You would have squeezed none of the collaborative innovation out of the team.
Yeah.
And in a remote environment, if you're not squeezing it out of these things called meetings in a remote environment, you're not getting it.
No.
So you got to engineer your meetings differently.
Yeah.
And so first thing you do is you do the diagnostic with your team, which we're giving for free. And we want you to do that. And then the second thing you do is where you're weak, you start to use some of these practices or just adopt all the practices. And those are also in the thing that we're giving you today. So I want you to always ask as a leader, how do I engineer my meeting for the behaviors that I'm looking for? That is a big breakthrough. And I want you to engineer it for co-elevation. I want you to engineer it so your leaders are the members of your team meet you in their leadership.
I love it. I absolutely love it. Now, one of the things you talked about, I mean, it was kind of there at the beginning when we started talking, and I know you're a great believer in it, which is how our work can change society, not just our business.
Now we're getting into the juicy stuff. I love it.
This is the stuff that I'm very passionate about too. So talk to us about your point on that and where you see that.
So I get sad when I look at the global divisiveness that's arising in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And not only is it happening in America with our political parties and how we work with each other. You know, there was a day, Dove, and I know you're not, or I don't know if you are an American citizen or not, but, you know, there was a day in America where Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, who were antithetical in their philosophies, Republican and Democrat, one was in the House, one was in the President, where they would have their battles and then they would go down to the White House and they would have a drink together in the evenings.
Yep.
And they would talk about the world that they each believed in and wanted to see, right? And that was a set of behaviors that I thought was a belief system. It's a social contract that we put the country in front of our parties. And we try to figure out ways to be of service. And when we have disagreements, we're going to fight like heck, right? It's like that old cartoon of the coyote and the roadrunner. Yeah. Remember at the end of chasing each other and bopping each other and whatever, then they both got their little lunch boxes and they walked off and said hello to each other. So we need more of a co-creation and co-elevation. Now, I think we've gotten to the stage where we viscerally stigmatize each other and demonize each other. And our fantasies are that there is no good in somebody that has a difference of opinion for us. And I think that's sad. And I think that's wrong-headed. So that's one thing. Then if you look on a global basis, even where our companies are going, because of the breakdown in global supply chain, we're now localizing our supply chains. And, you know, you start looking at how countries become less interdependent. And my fear, to be honest with you, is that philosophy, it's easier to lead to war.
Yep.
In a world where we're degrading into siloization and isolation, it's easier to, by not conversing, right? By not conversing and sharing and empathizing, it's easy to demonize and turn into the same sort of thing that we're seeing in our own countries. We see it on a global basis. So that is bothersome to me and it's worrisome to me. So what I've called for in Leading Without Authority is once you start to see this come to work, and I have seen this transform businesses. It helped General Motors get out of bankruptcy. It's helped Delta Airlines manage through this crisis. It's helped corporations put 20% on their share price. Once you start seeing it, then you bring it to your families. I've seen marriages saved when a CFO who's gone through a leading without authority philosophy then came back to me a year later and said, you know what? I went home and started having candid dialogue with my spouse. I realized she was about to divorce me.
Yep.
And then I have a foster child, and my foster son is now 21. He was 12 when I got him. I became a better parent through co-elevation.
Yeah.
I could not lead that boy like my dad led me, with authority and control. And then we start bringing it to our charities, and we start to think about how school boards lead with our most precious asset of our children, and how polarizing even school boards can be. Mm-hmm. And I just say, we've got to lead. We need a world of co-elevation. And I don't know what your faith is, but most of the great faiths of the world preach co-elevation at the principle without using the word. Mm-hmm. It's in us. It's in us, and it's a forgiveness. So anyway, that's my movement that I'm inviting people into.
Well, it's fascinating to me because one of the things that I will say when I go into a company is before I even start, I say, listen, I'm here to assist you becoming a dragon organization.
Which I love. I love that.
Having dragon fire and all the rest of it. But here's what I want you to know. I will have failed miserably if your stock value goes up, if your profits go up, and your marriages didn't get better, if your parenting didn't get better, if your friendships didn't get better, because this is the bottom line. I remember working with a client years ago who was a CEO, and he had scheduled we were on a contract for a year, and we're in our 5th meeting, and he says to me, he's kind of a bit pissed off, and he's like, I hired you to help me as a leadership coach, blah, blah, blah. And I was like, uh-huh. And he said, with my company, blah, blah. I said, uh-huh. And he says, and I said, so tell me what you're upset about. He goes, do you know how much we've spoken about business? And I said, I do. And he goes, how much do you think it was? And I said, it was half of the first session. And he said, yes. And I said, okay. And he goes, well, I hired you, and I said, hold on a second. Can I ask you a question? And he goes, yeah. I said, how are people responding to your leadership? He goes, well, that's better. I said, are you doing better? And he goes, yes. And I said, here's the problem. You think you are separate from the business when in fact your business is an outgrowth of your soul. And if you don't deal with that, it's not getting any better. I can teach you all the strategies in the world. It's not going to make any difference. In fact, you already have those people who are teaching the strategies. This is a soulful thing. And this is what you and I are talking about here. Yeah. Is that leadership is a soulful journey. It is the great spiritual journey, I believe, where we actually raise each other up in a synergistic, reciprocal, leading without authority, co-elevating way. And I love that you and I are on the same page with that. And I love that you're out there in such a massive way, Keith. And I sincerely tip my hat and bow to you for the work that you're doing, because this is work that needs to be done at the big levels, at the GM and at the Delta Airlines and all those levels, because it needs to land.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I wanted to be a minister.
Yeah.
And my dad said, heck no. I didn't bust my butt and get you into good schools to have you be a minister at $20,000 a year. And what I realized today is I'm blessed by not having to have a pulpit one day a week. I've got it 5.
Exactly.
And that's, I agree with you. And I would say that, our work, when we worked at the World Bank, so the World Bank is an organization, as controversial as some people might think it is at times, it's got an earnest desire to eradicate poverty. And their $100 billion of investment that it gives on an annualized basis is not enough to eradicate poverty. You can't give that. That's not enough loans to build the bridges and build the wells and the roads and the infrastructure that are needed. So the idea was, could we teach the agents of the World Bank to walk into a country, and instead of saying, I've got $500 million to allocate here, instead of saying that, say, I've got $500 million of seed capital that if I co-elevated with the local NGOs, the local high net worth families, and the local governments, that if I co-created a better solution, my money, it's called MFD, maximizing finance for development, my 100 billion could be a trillion in actual impact.
An impact. Yeah.
And that's what we did. We taught the World Bank leaders to go in to co-elevate, both inside of the World Bank and then with those constituents. And look, I mean, I'm just a poor kid from Pittsburgh, and the ability to have that kind of a ripple impact, and I don't know, Dov, where do you think we should go next with this? I talk about government and how it disappoints me, but if you really think about the world, you and I are working earnestly in companies.
Mm-hmm.
The ripple effect is into families. We both have seen that with our clients.
Yep.
The ripple effect is into the charities and things that they do.
Mm-hmm.
Where should you and I go? Like, where should our stuff go next? Like, if we had more intention, I thought the World Bank was a good example for me. Where should we go? Where should this philosophy, where do you think is the highest return? If I had a syringe of Dove and Keith, we're going to go put it somewhere, where would you put it?
Besides in the water?
Right, for everywhere.
Yeah, exactly. I think that as you said, the World Bank is a controversial entity for many reasons, particularly for those of us who have researched into those things. However, the problem often is that there are people in things that are extraordinarily good, and there are people in things that are malevolent. And we have to, the basic thing is, I think that we have to find a way to, this is why I'm in this field. That's why I became part of this field, which was not my original field, but was the reason I went in this field, was because I understood that you can only change if you change the world, if you change power, the people in power, and the access to power for people who are not in power. So for me, that is education at the basic level for, people like you and I who came from abject poverty. I was surrounded by crime and violence and addiction and poverty at every possible turn, as I'm sure you were. And so there's a ground roots level that we understand that your Harvard kid who was from a multi-generational family doesn't get. No disrespect for them. They just don't have that experience. And there's also, to get to the highest level of impact and find those people who still have that pure heart and that pure soul that does not have that malevolence to it. And honestly, in my experience, there are two very clear distinctions. At one level, I've met people at the very top, and they are, excuse my language, assholes who care about nothing more than power and money. But they are the minority. The majority of people I've met at the very top are the most kind, generous, caring, loving people I've ever met. They're extraordinarily generous, extraordinarily so. They're diligent. They don't want to waste their time, but they are extraordinarily generous. And if we can put that together, that for me is the solution. It's putting power into the hands of people who don't understand it and what can be done with it. And for the people who do understand it, bringing it to the ground so that everybody, and it's exactly what you're talking about, Keith, and I love it. It's this synergistic co-elevation. One of the things I wrote about in that piece I was writing about diverse board of advisors is understanding that the people you need to bring into your board of advisors are not the people you normally have. And I'll give you the three groups. Women, and by the way, that's not because of why you think it is as you're listening to this. One of the reasons is women is because women whisper into the ears of their children. And we forget that. We think the old white man has the power. No, the woman who whispers into the ears of her child has the power. Women, very important. Young people who we ignore, you don't understand. You're not old enough. You don't have wisdom. We need young people. We need their fresh ideas. We need their pissosity. We need their fire. It's important. That's how the world is changed. And we need the artists. because they speak truth to power. They say things that no one else will say. These are why that diverse crowd needs to come in. And so if we can inject into those three groups, we are going to make a massive difference. But that's just me getting on my phone. So thank you. Thank you, Reverend Keith, for inviting Rabbi Dov.
Well, the two things that I was thinking about as you were saying that is, and I've avoided one of them, the other one I've went to, is education, of course, right? And I've just avoided it because it's such a screwy system, at least it is in the States. How do you impact education? How do you get to kids early? Maybe it's not through formal education. Maybe it's through social media. Maybe, you know, that's actually interesting. There was a couple of kids I recently met. They were YouTube evangelists, not evangelists. They were YouTube influencers. They're cute, adorable brothers. They're just heartfelt, lovely. You look at their thing, it's all fun, jokey stuff, but it's never negative. It's always positive. And I went to them and I said, listen, you've got, you know, I think it was like 10 million followers or something crazy. And I said, what if you ignited 1 million of your followers to co-elevate with a couple of their friends to try to do good in society? Right? And they got all excited about that. So maybe that's one of the things we look at for the youth, right? And then the other place I went, and you'll get a kick out of this, I was invited among a group of friends of mine who are all thought leaders to come to the Vatican for a meeting. Oh, wow. And the meeting was about the church's role in a world where longevity might allow you to export your consciousness into another vessel. What's the role of the church when you could decide not to die? That was the question. Wow. And when I was there, that was a discussion that was interesting. It was Deepak Chopra and Tony Robbins and Peter Diamandis and all these interesting people meeting with the cardinals. But when I was there, I said, who's the right hand of the Pope? Is he in the room? It was interesting because this is how I met Hillary Clinton, and this is how I met Barack Obama, and this is how I met George Bush. I never look to go meet the top person. I always look who is the person handling the top person. And one whispering in there. The whispering, right? The mother of the individual, right? And I found the individual, the consigliere, I'm not going to say the person's name, but sure. This person is the consigliere to the Pope. Went up to him and I said, listen, I believe that the church is in a little bit of a situation. And imagine if this principle of co-elevation could be applied within the Vatican. And imagine if we could cascade co-elevation into a program that priests learned to aggregate their community to be of service, blah, 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 blah. So I've gone down this path and I've learned so much about the machinations of the bureaucracy of the church and the frailty, interestingly enough, the frailty of the Pope, in that he's just a guy trying to battle what his will is against a lot of individuals that he believes need to turn around in the church. He's not leading with co-elevation. He has a strong point of view and he's trying to force it through. And it's so interesting. And I sort of look at these massive institutions and, you know, I don't know if I'll get any traction there, but you know, but it's a fight worth having. It's a fight worth having. It took me over to Rome 3 times after that meeting. You know, it was interesting. It was interesting. We are already out of time, Keith. This has been a total pleasure and an honor. Thank you so much. I would love to continue, but we're at the end of this particular episode, which is our second episode. I want to thank you immensely for all that you've shared. Please tell our listeners and our viewers where they can find out more about you and all the wonderful resources that you have, and then we'll continue from there. Absolutely. Well, what we did is we put together a whole series of research. We've got this diagnostic tool that we want to give to you. We've got access to a course that we've designed that normally we charge for. We want to give it to your community. And it's at keithferrazzi.com/loyalty. There'll be lots of goodies there for you. And you'll be able to get, look me up on Instagram, look me up in other places. keithferrazzi.com/loyalty. And Dov, what a beautiful partnership. What a beautiful soul. What a great man. What great intention. Thank you for having me. And I'm looking forward to our call that you and I talked about, where you and I will figure out how we can co-elevate more than we have already.
Absolutely. I look forward to it too. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. Thank you so much, Keith. It's been an honor and a pleasure, really, genuinely an honor and a pleasure. And as Keith said, you can find out more about him at keithferrazzi.com/loyalty. If you want to get all those goodies, you can find him on Twitter at Ferrazzi. You can also find him on Instagram. Keith Ferrazzi is right there too. And you can hang out with other conscious leaders and chat about this episode or any past episodes by going into our Facebook or our LinkedIn groups. Just look for the Leadership and Loyalty podcast, because it doesn't matter how successful you are. If your employees, your customers don't understand what gives your company meaning, you're only working at a fraction of your capability. To find out more about how you can hire me, Dov Baron, as a speaker or leadership strategist for yourself or your organization, come on over to dovbaron.com, because unified meaning, or as we call it, finding your dragonfire, is the one single monolithic difference between mediocrity and greatness in both individuals and companies. I want to thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friend. Stay curious about how you can go out and co-elevate, not only in your company, but in your community. Lift everybody up. Remember, you can lead without authority. I'm Dov Baron, and I'm here to assist you tapping into your dragonfire to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your business, your life, and leadership impact. And I am out.